It's a very important hearing that we're having examining the preservation of State Department federal records. As we know now, Hillary Clinton as Secretary of State for nearly 4 years, or roughly 4 years, helped create one of what is reported to be one of the biggest security breaches in the history of the State Department. It is an absolute mess. We have witnesses here that are vital to our understanding of the problem, how we got into this mess, and how we are potentially going to clean it up. Joining us will be Mr. Justin Cooper, a former employee of President Bill Clinton and the Clinton Foundation. Mr. Cooper purchased the first server used by Secretary Clinton and had it installed in the basement of her private residence in Chappaqua, New York. He also registered the email domain clintonemail.com in 2009, and the same day that Secretary Clinton's confirmation hearings began in the United States Senate. Mr. Cooper has described his role in managing Secretary Clinton's private server as the, quote, customer service face, end quote. He explained to the FBI he helped Secretary Clinton set up her mobile devices, and when she finished with them, he would break them in half or destroy them with a hammer. Interesting, Mr. Cooper was never employed by the State Department while he managed the server she used to conduct the business of the government. When Mr. Cooper needed upgrading to the server for better service, he turned to Mr. Brian Pagliano. Mr. Pagliano had worked for Secretary Clinton's 2008 presidential campaign and was in the process of closing out the campaign's IT assets when Mr. Cooper called to discuss a new server for the Secretary. To put that new server together, Mr. Pagliano used one from her campaign. Anything else he needed was evidently bought off the shelf. And then in March of 2009, Mr. Pagliano and Mr. Cooper met in the Clintons' home in Chappaqua, New York, and installed the new server reportedly in the basement. Unlike Mr. Cooper, Mr. Pagliano then went on to become a State Department employee. Just a few months after installing the server, Mr. Pagliano was hired at the State Department as a GS-15 Schedule C. Public reports suggest Mr. Pagliano received a State Department check and he was paid by the Clintons, none of which he reported on his public disclosure forms as required. A recent Office of Inspector General report, Mr. Pagliano's supervisors at the State Department, quote, questioned whether he could support a private client during work hours given his capacity as a full-time government employee, end quote. Mr. Pagliano left the State Department in February of 2013, just as Hillary Clinton, Secretary Clinton, left. When responsibility for the server is turned over, when the responsibility for the server is turned over to our next two witnesses, things started to get a little bit more complicated. Mr. Bill Thornton and Mr. Paul Combetta both worked for Platte River Networks. Platte River was hired by Secretary Clinton in early 2013 to host the email server after Mr. Pagliano had been working on it. PRN, or Platte River Networks, migrated Secretary Clinton's emails on the Pagliano-managed server to its own server, which was located at a data center in Secaucus, New Jersey. Things with Platte River Networks get complicated in March of 2015, according to the FBI report. In early March 2015, the New York Times reveals Secretary Clinton used a private email account while at the State Department. The House Select Committee on Benghazi sends both a preservation request and a subpoena following the news. According to the FBI report, that preservation request is forwarded to PRN, or Platte River Networks, by Cheryl Mills, the former Secretary Clinton Chief of Staff and current attorney. In his first interview with the FBI, evidently, Mr. Combetta had no memory of that request. In a subsequent interview, he not only remembered the request, but stated he understood it meant not to delete any of Secretary Clinton's emails. Then, around the end of March, a number of things happened. There's a conference call between Platte River Networks, Cheryl Mills, and David Kendall, another one of Secretary Clinton's private attorneys. Then, once again, Mr. Combetta's story changes. In his first FBI interview, he says he deleted no emails of Secretary Clinton around that time, but later on he states he not only deleted the archive of Secretary Clinton's emails on the server, but also used a product called BleachBit to delete her PST files on the server. At the same time, a number of manual deletions were made on the backups of that Platte River Network server. We appreciate the witnesses that are here today. We hope they can illuminate the situation and allow us to better understand it because, as I said before, this is one of the biggest breaches of security in the history of the State Department. We have a duty and an obligation to investigate it. Now recognize the ranking member, Mr. Cummings, for his opening statement.